Owen Citizen's recent video on the Art of Video Games exhibition at the Smithsonian made me wonder whether video games can indeed be considered art. As Owen Citizen pointed out, art is incredibly difficult to define, but I view art as a creative aesthetic work that has the potential to arouse strong emotions in its audience. Paintings, books, films, TV, cartoons, comic books, theater, music, sculpture, and more all come under this definition. But do video games? Many cynics, including my mother, argue that the primary purpose of video games is to entertain, rather than to move and inspire us. I think that this stance is narrow-minded and quite unfair to the aesthetic value in video games. By the way, this is a full invitation for you to write video game-related yo mama jokes in the comments. Go ahead. Yes, video games are designed and expected to entertain, but so are movies, music, novels, theater, and so on. And the way video games entertain us is not all that different from how these more traditional art forms work. A game can have catchy, dramatic music. It can have an engaging narrative, complex characters, and interesting dialogue like a good movie, novel, or play. Lastly, a game can have pleasant graphics and visuals, much like a beautiful painting or a film with gorgeous cinematography. If a game has all the same elements as most of the classic art forms, then what sense is there in not calling it art? The only major difference is the interactivity of the gaming medium. Does this make video games toys? I would say so, though I see no reason why something can't be both a toy and a work of art. But that brings me to the question of whether all video games are art. Honestly, I'm not sure. My gut feeling is that very primitive games like Pong, Space Invaders, Tetris, and Pac-Man are not art. Pac-Man and Space Invaders have basic situations rather than stories. Tetris is just an addictive toy, and ask yourself, what artistic merit does Pong have? Going back to my original definition, I think that art should try to engage our emotions in some way. Art, even bad art, can make us feel joyful, calm, sad, afraid, angry, confused, excited, inspired, and even disgusted. As gamers, our emotions are often stimulated by good video games. We feel both amused and threatened by the sardonic AI GLaDOS and the witty dark humor in Portal. I felt deeply sympathetic toward Max Payne, a tormented man who lost his entire family and is out for revenge. Plus, the bullet-time fights are strangely beautiful in their power and flowing elegance. Games like Oddworld are zany and funny, and horror games obviously elicit fear in the player. Silent Hill 2, which Yahtzee gave a glowing recommendation for, generates feelings of loneliness, misery, and deep-seated existential dread as you explore the haunted town. In The Dig, one of my favorite games, the visuals and especially the music are outstanding, and I took in the game's derelict alien society with wonder, fascination, and hope for adventure. Games have generated compelling narratives, immersive worlds, and strong emotions since the industry's infancy, and advancing technologies give designers more complex, innovative ways to tell an emotional story. But what emotions do you get out of games like Pac-Man, Space Invaders, or Tetris? Then it hit me. Pride. The majority of games, from the 70s to the 2010s, establish a goal and set up conflicts and obstacles for the player to overcome with skill and ingenuity. Surpassing the challenges and mastering the game confers a sense of satisfaction in our abilities. You may feel proud of yourself for picking up all the fruit and evading the ghosts, lasting a long time in Tetris, or defeating all the attacking alien ships. If art is meant to generate emotion, then this feeling of pride is enough for me to call something like Pac-Man art, even though it's not very artistic, in the same way that Transformers is less artistic than The Fountain. I think most of us can agree that well-written, story-driven games like Mass Effect, KOTOR, Half-Life, a lot of indie games, and so on, are the most representative of video games as true art. Now, when discussing whether video games are art, addressing film critic Roger Ebert is both inevitable and necessary. Though I have a lot of respect for Ebert, I think that author and game designer Clive Barker was right to call him prejudiced when it comes to video games, as Ebert's articles on the subject feel extremely aloof and arrogant in their dismissal of games. You are, of course, free to dislike games, but essentially saying that games aren't worth your time is, again, rather arrogant and, frankly, a little insulting. Ebert believes that games can never be art because their interactivity removes a sense of authorship. I don't think that argument makes any sense. Video games do not lack the quality of authorship. It is true that the player must actively and deliberately make a game's story progress, and he or she will be presented with varying levels of choices and possible endings, but the player is moving along a predetermined, often linear path made by the game's designers. Video games have writers, directors, art designers, and programmers. David Cage, the founder and co-CEO of Quantic Dream, rightly styles himself as the director of his games, as he is the main creative figure behind them. In most cases, whatever authorship the player has only works to execute the narrative and gameplay framework that the designers have already meticulously created. A game would be inert without the player, but I would argue that the authorship of the creators not only exists in video games, but is more important than the authorship of players. Actually, the only game I can think of in which the authorship of the player is more important than the authorship of the creator would probably be Minecraft. Ultimately, I am convinced that video games are a kind of art. They often have the same attributes, including complex narratives, characters, dialogue, music, and pleasant visuals, as classic forms of art. They do have the quality of creative authorship, and their interactivity, which makes them double as toys, still makes no difference to their status as art. Despite my gut feeling, I accept that all video games are art, even though many games, as with many books, movies, and TV shows, aren't very artistic. If art, to me, is a creative aesthetic work that has the potential to generate heavy emotion, then video games certainly fit that definition. I'd like to hear what you think about this issue. Do you think that video games are art? Why or why not? And if you don't think that video games as a category are art, do you at least think that some individual games are art? Perhaps most importantly, how do you define art? And do video games fit into your definition? Thanks for watching. Cheers!